This is Kholat Sokol, or Dead Mountain, in the northern Ural region of Russia. For 70 years, this remote peak has stood as one of the most terrifying and baffling mysteries of the 20th century: the tragic and grotesque deaths of the Dyatlov Nine. Every single explanation you have heard, from secret military weapons and government conspiracies to infrasound and the mythical Yeti, shares a common, fundamental flaw. They treat the victims as passive objects of fate.
They suggest the fate of Igor Dyatlov's experienced hiking team was sealed by something utterly alien and unavoidable. But the most chilling conclusion is often the simplest. The Dyatlov tragedy wasn't a mystery about what killed them, but about a rapid, catastrophic cascade of bad decisions made by the victims themselves. In this analysis, we will strip away the myths.
We will use simple logic, the official forensic record, and the group's own documented choices to break down the final hours into 5 key mistakes. 5 completely avoidable errors that ultimately sealed the group's fate on that dreadful night. Our journey starts not with the event itself, but with the foundation of the disaster. Number 1. Avoidable mistake number 1. The decision of the campsite.
The Dyatlov group were not novices. They were seasoned, highly trained adventurers led by Igor Dyatlov, whose goal was to complete the highest classification for ski traverses in the frigid Urals. Their competence makes the first fatal decision all the more perplexing. They were delayed, struggling against fierce headwinds, and growing tired.
Their original plan was to descend from Kholat Syak and set up camp in a patch of forest roughly 1 kilometer further down the slope. But at around 5 p.m. on February 1st, they stopped. They made the fateful, irreversible choice to pitch their large 9-person tent on the completely exposed bare slope of the dead mountain itself.
They were still roughly 1.5 kilometers away from the protection of the tree line. Why did they do this? The leading theory suggests that Dyatlov wanted to practice camping on a slope in a harsh environment, a requirement for their higher certification. This choice was tactical, a deliberate act of pride and ambition over safety. It was a technical, avoidable error.
In doing so, they exposed their entire structure to katabatic winds, extremely dangerous cold air currents that raced down mountain slopes at high velocity. They ensured that if anything went wrong later that night, they would be fighting the elements at their very worst. They took away their own safety margin.
This positioning, this deliberate choice to put ambition ahead of immediate survival created the foundation for everything that followed. Had they pushed on for just 30 more minutes to the sheltered forest, the entire chain of events may never have begun. 2. Avoidable mistake number 2. Electing panic over procedure.
The time is somewhere between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. The exact trigger for the panic remains the only true mystery of Dyatlov Pass, but the evidence of the panic itself is undeniable. When the search party found the tent weeks later, they found it destroyed, not by an animal, and not by a large, clean rip.
It was cut from the inside in 2 distinct places, suggesting multiple people were trying to get out at once. Furthermore, the tent was cut across the path of the usual zipper entrance. They literally sacrificed their shelter to exit faster than their own zipper could allow. This leads us to avoidable mistake number 2, the catastrophic failure to control the initial panic.
Whatever the trigger was, be it a small slab of snow collapsing on the tent roof, a fierce wind gust creating a terrifying acoustic phenomenon, or an argument inside that escalated, the team, in that moment, chose a disorganized, high-risk flight over a low-risk, organized response.
Consider this. 9 experienced hikers,
trained for this very environment, abandoned their primary gear. They left behind their food, their boots, their winter coats, and their cooking gear. Why? Because the threat they perceived inside the tent was instantly more terrifying than the minus 40 degrees outside.
A successful response would have been simple. Shout to stay calm, zip up the tent door, and quickly assess the threat. Instead, a shared moment of blind terror resulted in the destruction of their survival capsule and their immediate exposure to the lethal elements. This mistake wasn't caused by the mountain. It was caused by human psychology under duress, and it turned a manageable emergency into a death sentence. 3. Avoidable mistake number 3. The half-dressed march of denial. After the panic, the group descended 1.5 kilometers down the slope toward a patch of forest. The descent itself was an unavoidable tragedy. Forensics confirmed what the tents suggested. Most of the team was barely dressed.
Several were in socks, some barefoot, others in only pajamas. One of the women, Lyudmila Dubinina, was found in just her underwear. They had left the ultimate survival gear, their warm boots and coats, behind. This gives us avoidable mistake number 3. The failure to return for life-saving gear, even after the initial threat had passed.
They had time. The threat was receding uphill at the tent, but they continued to run downhill. Even more damning, once they reached a relative shelter of the cedar tree at the forest line, approximately 90 minutes into the ordeal, they made no immediate move to send a scout back for supplies.
Why the denial? It's a classic survival error. Denial of the secondary threat. They were still focused on the trigger event, whatever happened at the tent, while the silent secondary killer, hypothermia, was already taking hold. The cold itself was becoming their new priority, but their minds had not yet caught up to the reality of their situation.
By the time they realized their critical error, the energy required to climb back up the steep, icy slope to the tent, especially in sub-zero temperatures and exhaustion, was too great. They had missed the narrow window to save themselves. They condemned themselves to freeze based on a psychological error of judgment, not an external force.
4. Avoidable mistake number 4, the fragmentation of command. The final, fatal breakdown came at the cedar tree. By the time they reached the forest, 2 members, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, had already died from hypothermia. The remaining 7 were alive but weakened. This was their last best chance to organize. Instead, they fragmented.
This is avoidable mistake number 4, the disintegration of a unified survival strategy. The evidence suggests the surviving 7 split into at least 3 separate groups. The firekeepers, 4 members stayed near the cedar tree. The explorers, Dyatlov and 2 others tried to climb back up the mountain. The searchers, the final 4 descended further into the ravine. A unified survival strategy demands that the strongest members use their remaining energy to build a secure shelter for the entire group, while others tend the fire. Instead, the decisions appear to have been made in desperation and isolation. The strongest members, by attempting a solo ascent or descent, took their vital energy and experience away from the weakest.
They failed the fundamental principle of mountain survival: stay together, organize, and prioritize shelter. If Dyatlov had simply commanded the remaining 7 to stay put, build the strongest possible snow cave, and share the remaining thermal resources, there is a very high probability that at least some of the group would have survived until morning.
Their end was a tragedy of individual heroism and fragmented leadership, which is no less avoidable than a physical error. 5. Avoidable mistake number 5. The denial of hypothermia. As the hours passed, 4 members, the final group found in the ravine, suffered catastrophic injuries, severe chest fractures, and crushing skull injuries. These trauma points are often cited as the ultimate proof of an external force, something massive and mysterious. But this brings us to avoidable mistake number 5, the failure to recognize and correctly treat the advanced stages of hypothermia. The final 4 were found at the bottom of a steep ravine, having fallen or stumbled into a snow hole while trying to build a snow den. These crushing injuries, while horrific, are consistent with a fall onto a frozen, unforgiving surface, especially when the victim's body is already rigid and frail from the cold. More subtly, their bodies also displayed a bizarre phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing. In the final stages of hypothermia, the vasoconstriction that kept blood near the core fails. The blood rushes back to the extremities, creating a sudden, overwhelming, and false sensation of heat. The victims tear off their clothes because they feel hot. The crucial mistake here is that the final 4 were so consumed by the physical and psychological chaos that they were unable to recognize these textbook symptoms. They succumbed to the instinctual, self-destructive final act of hypothermia. They were killed, ultimately, by their own body's faulty wiring in response to the cold they had failed to outrun. The mystery of their death dissolves not into a creature, but into a tragic, textbook failure of survival logic. Conclusion: a tragedy of avoidable errors. The Dyatlov Pass Incident is not the story of a terrifying, unsolvable enigma. It is a devastating case study in how a series of small, avoidable errors can compound into total catastrophe.
1. They made the avoidable mistake of prioritizing certification over shelter. 2. They allowed panic to override their training, cutting their avoidable way out of their survival capsule. 3. They suffered the avoidable denial of danger, condemning themselves to the cold. 4. They committed the avoidable error of fragmentation, shattering their last chance at organized survival. And finally, they succumbed to the avoidable psychological trap of paradoxical undressing.
The real tragedy is that had Dyatlov made a single different decision at 5 p.m. on February 1st, had he simply pushed his tired team 30 minutes further into the shelter of the forest, 9 lives would likely have been saved. The mountains didn't kill the Dyatlov group. A perfect storm of human error did.
If you found this logical breakdown compelling, hit the subscribe button. Next time, we're going to apply the same analysis to the mystery of the Mary Celeste. Can we solve a 150-year-old ghost ship mystery with simple logic? Let's find out.